The Roman heavy infantry is the most formidable land-fighting force of the ancient Mediterranean, a disciplined, armored wall designed for direct frontal dominance. In December of 218 BC, on the flat plains beside the Trebia River, a consular army stands ready to deploy. In theory, this is Rome's golden opportunity to leverage its numerical strength in heavy infantry and crush Hannibal's invasion in a single decisive clash. But before the main infantry lines had even collided, the battle had already been shaped. On a freezing winter morning, Hannibal Barca executes a calculated tactical plan. He does not wait to meet the Romans on equal terms. Instead, he systematically manipulates the Roman commander's confidence, forcing thousands of legionaries to wade breast-deep through the icy cold waters of the swollen Trebia. Long before they reach the Carthaginian main line, their bodies are physically degraded, their limbs are numbed by the freezing river, and a hidden ambush force is already waiting to strike them from behind. How did Hannibal make an entire Roman army walk directly into the battle he wanted? This is the story of a geographic and physical trap that broke the Roman tactical plan before Rome's heavy infantry could bring its greatest strength fully into action. In the aftermath of the cavalry clash at the Ticinus, the Roman consul Publius Cornelius Scipio withdrew his forces toward the Trebia River, establishing a fortified camp to protect his wounded body and await reinforcements. Recognizing the growing Carthaginian threat, the Roman Senate recalled Tiberius Sempronius Longus from Sicily, ordering him to march his legions north with immediate urgency. Upon joining Scipio near the Trebia, Sempronius assumed active command of the combined forces due to Scipio's physical incapacity. The joint Roman command was immediately divided by a sharp contrast in perspective. Scipio, cooled by his recent defeat, advised caution. He believed that the raw Roman recruits required further winter training, and that the fickle Gallic allies would abandon Hannibal if the Carthaginian army was kept in forced inactivity. Sempronius, however, was highly confident. His confidence grew after his vanguard won a minor skirmish against Carthaginian foragers, leading him to believe that Scipio's hesitation was unnecessary. Driven by the approaching consular elections and the desire to secure a victory before his term expired, Sempronius sought an immediate general engagement. Hannibal Barca read this division and Sempronius's eagerness with clarity. To exploit the consul's confidence, Hannibal sought to draw the Romans onto a battlefield of his own choosing. Exploring the plains between the camps, Hannibal identified a concealed watercourse, whose high banks and vegetation could hide troops from view. In the dark of the night, Hannibal ordered his younger brother, Mago Barca, to lead a selected force of 1,000 cavalry and 1,000 light infantry into this brush-covered watercourse. While the precise location of the camps and the battlefield remains a subject of intense historical debate among modern scholars, the trap was now set. Hannibal's army stood ready, while Mago's force lay hidden in the brush. The Carthaginian commander now only needed the Roman consul to take the initiative and cross the freezing river. At first light on a bitter winter morning, near the winter solstice of December 218 BC, Hannibal Barca put his plan into motion. He ordered his Numidian light cavalry to cross the freezing waters of the Trebia River. Their instructions were to ride directly to the gates of the Roman camp, discharge missiles at the outposts, and goad the Romans into an immediate pursuit. Once the skirmish began, the Numidians were to execute a feigned retreat, slowly giving ground to lure the pursuers back across the river to the Carthaginian side. Hannibal's goal was simple. He wanted to force the Romans to fight on his timetable and on his chosen ground, long before they had eaten or prepared for combat. The Roman commander, Tiberius Sempronius Longus, reacted exactly as Hannibal had anticipated. Flushed with confidence from a successful cavalry skirmish the previous day, Sempronius believed he held the initiative. Eager for a decisive battle before his consular term expired, he dismissed Scipio's counsels of caution and immediately sent out his entire cavalry force to drive off the Numidians. Shortly after, he ordered 6,000 light infantry, armed with javelins, to march out and support the horsemen. Finally, believing that the mere sight of his force would decide the conflict, Sempronius ordered his entire army of Roman legionaries and Italian allies to march out of their camp. In his eagerness to seize the opportunity, the consul made a critical omission. He rushed his men onto the field without allowing them to eat their morning meal or protect themselves against the biting winter cold. Meanwhile, inside the Carthaginian camp, Hannibal's soldiers had eaten a hearty breakfast, fed their horses, and prepared their weapons. On Hannibal's orders, they anointed themselves with oil around their fires to preserve their body heat. When Sempronius ordered his army forward, he was not simply marching them toward a coordinate on a map. He was driving thousands of cold and unprepared soldiers into a severe disadvantage, carrying them away from the security of their fortified camp and toward the freezing waters of the Trebia River. The movement of the Roman legions out of their camps marked the beginning of a severe physical struggle. As Tiberius Sempronius Longus ordered his forces forward, the Roman soldiers marched directly into a raw, winter environment. The day was excessively cold, filled with falling snow and bitter winds that swept across the plains. Having been roused hastily from their sleep to pursue the Numidian cavalry, the Roman legionaries and their Italian allies advanced on empty stomachs without their morning meal or any preparation for the biting cold. Standing between the advancing Romans and the Carthaginian lines was the Trebia River. Swollen by heavy overnight rain in the mountains, the river was running high and swift. To reach the ground chosen by Hannibal, the Roman infantry had to plunge directly into the icy cold waters. As they struggled through the current, the freezing water reached breast high, soaking their wool clothing, leather jerkins, and heavy armor. The physical toll of this crossing was immediate. By the time the soldiers emerged on the western bank, the biting cold had penetrated their bodies. Their limbs were numbed, their muscles grew stiff, and they were shivering, barely able to hold their javelins or grip their shields securely. The river was not merely an obstacle on the map. It had actively altered the physical condition of the Roman army. In stark contrast, Hannibal's soldiers were in excellent physical condition. The Carthaginian commander had ensured his men ate an early meal, rested, and prepared themselves around their campfires. On his orders, they had rubbed their bodies with oil to insulate themselves against the freezing air and moisture. The river had done what Hannibal needed. It had weakened the Roman army before deployment. Yet, while their bodies had been severely weakened, Roman discipline had not. Despite their shivering limbs and empty stomachs, the soldiers did not fall into confusion. They maintained their resolve, dressed their lines, and prepared to advance in their regular battle order. They stood in their traditional formations, shivering but steady, ready to close the distance. As they reformed their ranks on the wet floodplain, the Roman army now had the Trebia behind it and Hannibal's line ahead. The Roman consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus deployed his forces on the floodplain near the Trebia. According to Polybius, Sempronius commanded roughly 36,000 Roman and allied infantry, supported on the flanks by about 4,000 cavalry. Livy, however, provides slightly different figures, estimating 18,000 Romans and 20,000 Latin allies, along with a contingent of Gallic Cenomani auxiliaries. Within this force, The heavy infantry formed the core of the Roman battle order, utilizing the structural strength of the Middle Republic's manipular system to prepare for a direct frontal assault. Screening this central column were 6,000 light infantry armed with javelins. The Roman plan relied entirely on the qualitative and numerical strength of their heavy infantry, intending to launch a direct frontal assault to drive through the Carthaginian center. Opposite the Roman lines, Hannibal Barca drew up his 40,000 men with calculated symmetry. In the center, Hannibal formed roughly 20,000 Iberian, Celtic, and Libyan infantry in one long line, relying on this infantry to hold its ground while his wings decided the battle. On each flank of this central infantry block, he stationed his war elephants. On his outer wings, he concentrated his overwhelming cavalry force of more than 10,000 horsemen, outnumbering the Roman cavalry by more than 2 to 1. To cover his deployment, he threw forward a screen of 8,000 light infantry, composed of Balearic slingers and spear-armed skirmishers. The battle opened with a direct confrontation between the opposing light-armed screens. The Roman skirmishers were already at a severe physical disadvantage. They had already expended most of their javelins against the Numidians, while many of those remaining had become useless after being soaked. Shivering and exhausted, they were easily outmatched by the fresh Balearic slingers, whose stones and lead shot poured a relentless barrage into the Roman ranks. The Carthaginian light troops quickly got the better of the skirmishing, driving the exhausted Romans back through the gaps of the advancing heavy infantry legions. As the light troops withdrew, the two main heavy infantry lines moved forward to close the distance, bringing the core of both armies into direct contact. With the light infantry skirmishers cleared from the field, the heavy infantry formations of both armies moved forward and crashed into one another. As the central lines engaged in a fierce, stationary, hand-to-hand struggle, the battle shifted dramatically to the outer wings. On each flank, Hannibal had divided more than 10,000 cavalry between his two wings. Directly opposing them, Tiberius Sempronius Longus possessed only 4,000 cavalry, split evenly to protect the flanks of his infantry column. Hannibal's overwhelming numerical superiority on the flanks immediately began to dictate the battle. The cavalry collision on the wings was swift and highly unequal. The Roman horsemen were already severely disadvantaged before the clash began. Their mounts were exhausted from the morning's pursuit and shivering from the deep, freezing crossing of the Trebia. Outflanked and physically depleted, the Roman cavalry was driven from the wings. The rapid removal of the Roman horsemen completely altered the geometry of the battlefield. The Roman infantry was still pushing forward, but the battlefield around it was opening on both sides. Carthaginian and Numidian light troops, supported by the war elephants on the wings, began pressing the exposed Roman flanks. During this chaotic phase, a specific tactical sequence unfolded with the war elephants, as recorded by Livy. Stationed on the wings, the towering beasts initially panicked the Roman cavalry horses, contributing to the collapse of the Roman wings. Yet the Roman heavy infantry in the center held their ground. To neutralize the beasts, Roman skirmishers bravely advanced, flinging javelins and forcing the elephants to turn back in agitation toward their own lines. Recognizing the risk of self-inflicted disruption, Hannibal ordered the agitated elephants to be redirected and driven toward the Carthaginian left wing. There, the beasts crashed directly into the Gallic Cenomani auxiliaries stationed on the Roman right. Unable to withstand the immense weight and unfamiliar smell of the beasts, this allied wing broke, leaving the Roman right flank completely exposed. The geometry of the battle was now completely transformed. In the center, the Roman heavy infantry maintained an obstinate equal struggle, but on their sides, the line was crumbling. Under assault on both flanks by fresh skirmishers and redirected elephants, the Roman infantry column was left isolated. The tactical shield Sempronius had relied upon to protect his heavy center was gone, and the trap was about to be sealed. At the absolute crisis point of the battle, while the central infantry lines remained locked in a fierce head-on struggle, the final part of Hannibal's trap was set in motion. From the concealed watercourse behind the Roman advance, Mago Barca observed that the main body of the Roman infantry had fully moved past his hiding place. On his command, Mago's hidden force, a selected force of 1,000 cavalry and 1,000 light infantry, surged out of the underbrush. They launched a sudden, coordinated assault that struck the Roman formation from the rear. This sudden onslaught from behind was the moment Hannibal's trap was fully sealed. All of the Roman commander's early morning omissions, marching his men out on empty stomachs, wading through the chest-high freezing water of the swollen Trebia, onto a battlefield where Mago's force had remained entirely undetected, now culminated in a catastrophic encirclement. The enemy was now in front, on the flanks, and behind, on a battlefield entirely chosen by Hannibal. Despite the immense and sudden shock of Mago's charge, the Roman ranks desperately attempted to hold their ground. Showing their remarkable discipline, the soldiers in the rear tried to maintain a defensive front and resist the onslaught. However, their physical exhaustion severely compromised their defensive capability. Cold, shivering, and faint from hunger, the men lacked the physical strength to hold their shields steady or mount an effective counterattack. To compound the disaster, the Carthaginian and Numidian cavalry wings, having driven the Roman horsemen from the field, now wheeled back to the main battlefield. They returned in dense squadrons, crashing directly into the exposed sides of the collapsing Roman formation. Under this immense multi-directional pressure, the tactical cohesion of the allied Italian infantry and Gallic auxiliaries on the flanks began to disintegrate. Faced with the terror of the war elephants and pelted by a relentless storm of missiles, the outer ranks broke, throwing the Roman rear into utter confusion. For thousands of men, the only escape route lay across the freezing, swollen waters of the Trebia behind them. But the swift current and their own physical exhaustion made survival nearly impossible. Hannibal had broken the Roman battle plan, and the encircled army was now being crushed. At the height of the encirclement, as the Roman wings collapsed and Mago's ambush force pressured the rear, a remarkable display of tactical discipline emerged from the center of the battlefield. While the outer ranks of the Roman army dissolved into confusion and panic, the core of the Roman heavy infantry, composed of roughly 10,000 Roman and allied infantry, maintained its defensive cohesion. Surrounded on nearly all sides, these soldiers did not panic. Under the pressure of a multi-directional assault, they dressed their ranks and formed a solid, unified defensive column. Rather than attempting to turn back to save their collapsing rear or break through the encirclement on their flanks, the Roman center resolved to push forward. They drove into the Carthaginian center and eventually forced their way through, inflicting heavy losses. Once they had broken clean through the Carthaginian center, the 10,000 Roman troops found themselves in the rear of Hannibal's army. However, they could not return to their camp. The Trebia River, swollen and icy cold, stood between them and their original position, and the driving rain made it difficult to judge where they could best aid the rest of the army. Recognizing that the battle was lost, but refusing to scatter in panic, the troops maintained their close, disciplined formation. Rather than attempting a perilous recrossing of the river under pressure from the victorious Carthaginian cavalry, The column turned and marched in close order straight toward the fortified Roman colony of Placentia. This disciplined breakout represented a remarkable tactical feat amid an operational disaster. While Hannibal Barca had successfully exploited the terrain, the weather, and the consul's impatience to dismantle Rome's overall battle plan, he had not broken the fighting spirit of every Roman soldier. The heavy infantry had proven that, even when cold, wet, hungry, and entirely surrounded, their tactical discipline was capable of cutting through the very center of a victorious army. This breakout ensured that a substantial body of Roman survivors reached Placentia safely to preserve the Republic's remaining strength for the campaigns ahead. The Battle of the Trebia was not merely a tactical defeat for Rome. It was a profound strategic and psychological warning. Roman losses were severe, though the ancient sources do not preserve a secure total. Strategically, the victory established Hannibal Barca's operational dominance in northern Italy, strengthened his position among the Gauls of the Po Valley, and brought additional recruits and support to his campaign. The victory was not achieved by a single tactical stroke, but through a combination of preparation, environmental awareness, and timing. By drawing the Romans across a freezing, swollen river on empty stomachs, while his own men remained warm, fed, and rested, Hannibal compromised the physical capability of his enemy before the main heavy infantry lines even collided. On the battlefield, he integrated this physical advantage with cavalry superiority and the hidden reserve of Mago Barca to dismantle the Roman battle plan. The battle demonstrated that even the superb combat power of Rome's heavy infantry, as proven by the 10,000 who successfully cut their way through the Carthaginian center, could not compensate for a situation where troops were exhausted, their flanks exposed to superior cavalry, and their rear struck by a concealed ambush force. Following the defeat, the Roman Senate took immediate steps to rebuild. Sempronius Longus returned to Rome to conduct the consular elections. New legions were raised, and the Republic prepared to continue the war. But Hannibal's next campaign would demonstrate that Trebia had not been the last time he could turn movement and terrain into a weapon. Ultimately, the lesson of the Trebia remains timeless. At Trebia, the decisive maneuver began long before the lines collided. Hannibal did not simply defeat the Roman legions. He won first by controlling when Rome fought, where it fought, and in what condition its soldiers arrived.